We are back with another episode, and we already kind of had a theme for the next episode, but we last minute decided to switch it up a little bit. So for those who have been following Ryan's journey, who are subscribed to his Instagram but definitely YouTube channel, you will have seen the mind control videos, the videos where he talks about the stuff that took place when he was a child. And many people have reached out to him privately saying, thank you for posting this happened to me, similar things happened to me. So, of course, he wanted to get deeper into the rest of his story. And first, he was thinking of doing a video on it just on his own on YouTube. And then I got the idea, would it be helpful for me to kind of be in the video so that we can turn it into a dialogue? So that we create a structure that's easier for people to follow, because there is so much that it's very layered. It's a very layered story. So that's why we're doing it like this in the podcast.
And I made a video trying to explain these things. And then we were watching it back and I just wasn't satisfied with it. And she asked me all these different questions and it laid out this whole structure. And this is interesting because this is going to be the first time I'm talking about certain things, mentioning certain names that are a part of Nancy's family, and really just going into what I now know around Nancy and who she is and who her family is and what they kind of are here doing and have been involved in. And so if you don't know who Nancy is, she is my handler, was my handler. I have in the last year confronted her about this whole situation, cut her off from my life, put in boundaries, and she's no longer a part of my life. Although I do know that she watches all of these videos, and since I know you're going to be watching this one too, Nancy, this one is especially for you. This one is especially for the Hopes and this family that I was told was mine when I was growing up. And so it's going to be these kind of overarching storylines. But first, I think I need to get into explaining certain things before going into the details of the story with Nancy.
And I quickly wanted to say that we have privately been watching other people's stories, finding other people reaching out. So this is not just one person that this happened to. Ryan is one of the examples of many, more than you can even begin to imagine, people who have gone through this, people that may not even remember that they have gone through this. And some of the stuff that you're gonna hear may sound really whoa, what are you talking about? But these other people are saying similar things. So it is not just him that has experienced this. This is something that is happening to many people.
That's exactly why I have a duty to talk about it, because I know that it's happening to so many people. And that's why I'm excited to go into the layers around this, because it's not like I've just found myself in this kind of scenario where this kind of energy was involved in my life and I was caught in it. The thread that I'm pulling on is a thread directly to the center of this entire service to self matrix and all of their moves. And so, yeah, I'm just going to grab my water bottle real quick.
Yeah, and I am going to just give kind of a little introduction, because we are going to be combining a lot of topics. So some of you may have heard about these dark family lines that control the governments. Some of you may have heard about AI. Some of you are familiar with the entire starseed concept. But we are bringing a lot of this stuff together in this one story because it all connects together. And that's why we felt it was a good idea for us to do this together, because it's going to make it easier for you to understand as much as possible, because that is the goal, of course, of this thing. We want you to get as much out of this as possible.
Yeah, and it helps us understand talking about it. And I'm not going to say go watch the other mind control chapters before watching this. That's not necessary. But if you do decide to go watch the other ones, they are more pieces to the puzzle. So they just add kind of different context and texture to what this story is about. But this is hopefully going to bring a lot of that into perspective as well. There's going to be multiple parts to this as well. This one is really focused around Nancy and around her family, and the family that I grew up, that was told was Nancy was my biological mother, and that her side of the family was my family. So this is all about them and kind of leading into the overall picture of them. And we're going to talk about things that we've talked about before too. So we're kind of going to like layer it over each other.
So you will have heard how he mentions cloning, how that happens. And if you are watching his videos, you have like probably heard about cloning in the context of Hollywood and how they're cloning these celebrities, or like they're cloning people, whatever. But cloning happens on a galactic scale, and it goes beyond simply cloning a physical body. So it gets real crazy. So what really is cloning? How can you... we need to start with the beginning, which is what actually is cloning.
Yeah, cloning is just almost exactly how we see it in movies. It's like taking genetic material from something and putting it through a technological process, a scientific mechanism that is a process that is a higher dimensional process than what we know of. And so most people get caught up in the fact that cloning could exist and kind of exactly the details of how that would work, and only really bringing that into the idea of truth that it's happening if they like have all these details worked out. So I don't have all of the details worked out, but what I can see is that it's very simply done by taking genetic material from a body and then turning it into different types of replications of itself. So you can replicate the entire body and at the age that it's at, and just duplicate it and turn it into that type of body. So that's like a holographic replication of a clone, versus taking genetic material and bringing all this different genetic material together to put it through an incubation process and then have it grow essentially similar to like a womb grows. And then they can speed up the time and the process and the length of how fast these things grow. So they could grow someone into like a 40-year-old person in a couple years, but then they'll bring that person in that age into their timeline, and then that person gets subject to time. And so this cloning process is done with animals, it's done with any types of genetics, and they can clone anything from babies up into like a 100-year-old man, or a lot of what this is happening from is these higher vibrational beings that have live for longer than we know, like multiple hundreds of years. and they want to pass on their consciousness and like seed their consciousness. So they'll take genetic material of themselves and then turn it into a bunch of different clones, turn it into, mix it with different genetics from human races and from other races around the galaxy. And so they'll pass their consciousness on through the creation of clones from them. And so they inherently, when cloning is happening, the consciousness that the genetic material is taken from, that's an aspect of that soul. So that soul is going to be taken to the clone of itself. So the presence of that original soul is going to exist within the clone. And then, just as a baseline level, and then there are soul transferring technologies and specifically soul like isolating technologies, and then artificial transfer technologies to be able to actually take the full consciousness and the full soul of someone and store it somewhere, isolate it, store it somewhere, and then pass it on into these different clones. And so that's what all of these different service to self beings are doing throughout all of these different types of species, of their genetic lines, of their races. They're all creating these artificial aspects of generations by implementing this cloning process throughout time.
Mm-hmm. And it's by simply hearing this information, it's not going to be new stuff, but you may start to remember stuff and memories if you have access to some of your past lives or childhood or whatever. You're going to see it from a different, like through a different lens. It's going to become more multifaceted, and you're going to see things that before you just didn't have the awareness yet to perceive. And ever since I learned about clones, I've been able to look at soul contracts way more easily and see how there was cloning involved in someone's Akashic records. Mm-hmm. And this incubation process, we talked about this in a previous podcast. So ever since I learned about it, I asked the Akashic records, show me how this works. And I started seeing how this worked, and there's different types of centers, let's call it that, both on planet Earth and off planet, and different techniques of cloning, just like he explained. And they were showing these like pods, almost incubation chambers, like you see in the movies, with like somebody growing in like a little pod.
Yeah, and it's like a womb type of environment with like liquid and kind of like more liquid based. But then there seems to also be this like almost like air type of environment where there's this like, it's like a plant, and we talked about this a little bit, and it's like this kind of plant that is like this greenhouse. And it's not in like a liquid tank, like it's in a womb. It's in this like, it's like growing almost like from a foundation of like a plant, like soil. And so they have all these different techniques to do that. And they have these at different centers, like you said, that are around planet Earth. And the main ones that have been coming up for this process and this story are the cloning centers in Italy, and the cloning centers in the Great Lakes area. That's inner Earth. Both of those are inner Earth cloning centers, and we described the way they can access these cloning centers through the water, didn't we? In that other video, where there's these different portals and underground areas where they can fly a ship in and then go into inner Earth. And they have these huge cloning centers that are underground, that are in inner Earth, where they're doing all of this. And so they have these huge incubation chambers. They have these huge storage chambers, because they'll take clones from other time cycles and then store them, and then use those genetics at a different evolution. 25,000 years later, they'll pull out that genetics and use that as a clone. And so then they have all of these different orphanages and these different centers that are positioned and set up like orphanages. It's kind of like the V for Vendetta orphanages, if you've seen that. It's like very heavy orphanages where they know that these are clones and they're like programming them, they're abusing them. There's like all of this, it's kind of like V for Vendetta mixed with Westworld, where there's like all of this psychosis within these clones because they're in like learning stages and like getting in tune with the cloning process, and that consciousness is getting used to that process. So they have these different like orphanages that exist above ground that they then bring these clones to, and they start putting them through these like kind of trauma bond, like mind control processes, essentially.
Okay, because that was already a lot, and I understand a lot of what you're saying. Because I've seen it with my own eyes, well, third eye in the Akashic records. But like when you say they take these people or genetic material from other time cycles, and then they later create clones. What are some examples so that people understand what that means?
Yeah, so it's like someone is living in the Pleiades star system. There is a war, or not even necessarily war, a conflict where the service to self factions are able to get genetic material from that body that's in the Pleiades star system. So it's very easy to get genetic material. It's spit, hair, skin, blood, anything, toenail, fingernail. It's very easy to get genetic material. So all they would have to do, is take that genetic material in Pleiades, and then they bring that genetic material to the different center points and storage places they have throughout the galaxy. And so say they bring those genetics to this Earth, then they decide to implement those genetics at a certain time in this Earth. So they just took those genetics from another time cycle, brought them here, and now they're putting them into place in this current time.
Mm-hmm. Because that's also one thing that I want to quickly add. What I've seen, what we've both seen in the Akashic records, is that's a good thing to keep in mind. History, the way that you have learned it in school, is not the history, it's the program that you've received. There is a lot of hidden technology that we are not aware of, that they are trying to make it seem like they are now only getting cloning established with the sheep that they've been cloning and all this stuff, and yay, it's this big accomplishment. No, they've been having this technology. They've been having it since Atlantis. It never went away. It never stopped existing. It just became only accessible to certain elite groups that were using it for their agenda. That's the only thing. So we were living in the Middle Ages, in all these times where we did not have advanced technology, but there were certain groups on the planet that kept on having access to all of this Atlantean technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there's a difference too between like hybrid AI infected service to self family lines and cloning, because the cloning process is different. It's doing it through this scientific artificial laboratory process, to whereas there is breeding that's done through service to self family lines as well. There are organic human bodies being birthed, or reptilians, draconians, zetas. They are able to birth their generations in certain ways, but their consciousness is so intertwined with this artificial hive mind technology that it still is an artificial process. So even if they're having sex, conceiving, like having the gestation period and then having their young, there's still an artificial hive mind that's embedded in the bodies and in the consciousness of those family lines. So they're still being brought into this whole artificial matrix structure. And so I just want to create a definition of that, because not all service to self artificial beings or even hybrid beings are clones. Clones are specifically done through this process that is able to take the genetics and speed up the process of them growing, get them to a certain age, and like artificially influence that. But we're seeing all these other things come into the space now where people can like choose what genetics they want for their baby and what color hair. And so it's like, it's all combining into these different things, but there are these clones and these more kind of like hybrid service to self beings. And these hybrid service to self beings are the ones that hold like a lot of power. They're the ones at the top of the hierarchy. They're the ones that are infected with the hive mind, but they're not in a cloned body. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
To me, it makes sense.
Because there's a difference.
Yeah, and also when anyone has, like, if something is not clear yet, leave a comment, because then we can do another episode. He can make videos about it, referring back to the podcast, so that you can get more clear on what it is that we're sharing today.
Yeah. And I'm trying to give examples as best as possible too, this is where you get these dark avatars. Say you have a dark Anunnaki avatar that is, I say avatar meaning like embodied in a lot of power, like holds avatar power. They want to put their consciousness into races and generations of people, so they take genetic material from themselves and then willingly create clones of themselves. And so that is a being who was not cloned themselves, but they're then extending themselves into this space by cloning themselves on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's so many layers to this whole cloning thing, where there's people that are deliberately cloning themselves. Then there are people that have been cloned, which we have covered a little bit in one of the first podcast episodes, where in other star systems they are the victim basically of being cloned. And that's a whole other story, where these clones are then inserted in the lives of these people to kind of create background noise and distractions. But that's the other story. So these bloodlines and these cloning centers, yeah.
Well, they build, like, in this time period, we think of like these narratives, like people have histories, they have childhood pictures, they have all of these memories and these stories and birth certificates and all of this proof that is given as evidence for them going through this process like the rest of us did. But these families have access to such high artificial technology that they're able to fake those things. They're able to fake these narratives. They're able to fake childhood pictures that make them look like this picture's from 1950. Well, it was created, 10 years ago in a lab. And so it's like they're able to do all of these things because they just know that we're not thinking about them. And so that's what creates and builds these narratives of these clones and these replicated beings that have these long arcs. And so clones will be brought into these family lines, and they'll have these narratives, and maybe they don't know they're a clone. And then there's also shapeshifters who are in these lines who know they have these narratives, and they're playing that part and they're acting that part out. So there are clones, like she said, that have a mix of genetic material from a positive being, because those genetics were taken from a positive being to make that negative clone. So that part of that positive consciousness will reflect in that clone, and that's how they're able to kind of create this false light screen, because the clone won't know they're a clone, and they'll have this memory and this consciousness of this positivity. So it creates this mix. And this is where you have these elite service to self family lines. They run the entertainment and the military industrial complex through being able to build these narratives, through being able to create these replications, to create these characters, and to bring these characters in, and then have this different evidence around the existence of that person, and know that people aren't going to question that, because they're also part of a powerful family. So they know that they aren't going to receive the same types of questions that you would in a different type of situation, I guess.
And like what I've started to just realize is also that there's really two entire layers of society. And there's this whole shadow society that is basically aware of all of these things that are happening, and then there's everyone else that thinks that everyone is just normal, that there's no weird stuff happening here. And then there's all of these other families that are involved with all this stuff, and to them that is normal, and everyone that they know is in these circles. And there is, like, they all go through a lot of these same programs. They are being put through a lot of these same programs. And what I've started to see is also some of the podcasts that we've been listening to together, is how now in these families, there's like people being born into these families that are rebelling against that whole program, basically, because the planet is ascending. So there are here and there people that are actually choosing as a soul to be born into these bloodlines to expose this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have so much I want to say to that, but it goes in this whole other direction.
Yes.
So I want to try and stay on this.
So yeah.
No, but that's perfect what you said, because it's like, this is how these systems shift, because these family lines are the ones that have been controlling these systems for so long. So you have these dark souls, or these dark clones that are created and replicated to maintain control of the system. Then you have these positive aspects of these souls that are able to come into those family lines and remember themselves when they're a clone, all these different scenarios. And so that's changing the system from the inside out. But this is how these family lines have run these industries for so long. And specifically in the military and entertainment industrial complex, this is where they have these mind control programs. You know, you think of the Mickey Mouse Club for Disney, and then certain scientific, mathematic, engineering programs for children that are like military pre-programs. So they have that's on the forward-facing side, the non-shadow side. But then in the shadow reality, they have these dark mind control programs that are running, that are what I was put through, that is there to create sleeper cells and to create spiritual warfare weapons. So basically to create drones out of the children that they're putting through these programs, that then these children grow up and they're able to push them as adults into these different places and these different industries.
So, we are also looking at some of these notes.
Yeah, I'll just keep. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Because it is just so much. So how this is all connecting on planet Earth, what that looks like with these different programs, and what, like, these people being born into these families, and how is this connected? Like, we talked a little bit about this cloning on a galactic scale, and how is this connected to human trafficking, not only on Earth, but also in the galaxy? Yeah. And that's where we get from the topic of just this happening on Earth to this has been happening in the galaxy.
Yeah, it's like the core of it, because these shadow systems are set up to run off of human essence, to run off of soul essence. So they have to consume essence in order to keep these systems running, because that system is alive itself. It is the thing that is consuming this energy to keep itself running. And so underneath all of that, in the deepest layer of the shadow, they're running these human trafficking systems. And it's more than just human trafficking, like you're saying. It's races from all across the galaxy, because they have these cloning centers and these programs set up on many different star systems. And so you take that from the Earth, and knowing that the entertainment industry is what creates subliminal programming, and the military industrial complex is what upholds the war and the sacrifice. And so it's running off of those things. And so it's the consciousness of the matrix programming itself into people, so they become a part of that matrix, and that system stays and sustains itself. And so that simply, I don't know if simply is the right word, but this is just happening everywhere. It connects into many places across the galaxy, because there has been trafficking and slave trade happening in so many different places.
Mm-hmm. And if you're watching this, you will probably already be familiar with what he talks about, what I talk about. But if this is all a little bit much and you're like, what are you talking about? Then definitely go check out some of our other content where we talk more about this galactic war that took place. If we're going to look at linear time, way years ago, there was an entire galactic war. And the result of that is that many of these different civilizations then came to Earth, and some of them were benevolent, some were not benevolent, and both of them were trying to basically own Earth, so to speak. And so all of this galactic stuff is now playing out on a smaller scale on this planet again. So, yeah.
Yep.
And what that looked like too is in Mesopotamia, after the fall of Atlantis, there was an entire slave race basically that was created. And how does that connect with the cloning and all of that stuff?
Yeah, that's an example of, I think, like someone like Enki. Like we think of Enki, or another keyword is Thoth, I think, is like them taking their consciousness and cloning themselves into generations and into different races. And so these families mix in many different areas, but I've found organization and distinction through these different places that I'm about to mention. And so it's like in the kind of I won't say northern and southern because it's all over. So it's like the Draconian, the Syrian, and the Anunnaki royal families are coming from Antarctica, and they come up through South America, into Central America, into Mexico, and they also run over into China and Asia. China and Asia, meaning that whole Middle East area as well, and where Mesopotamia was, and Afghanistan and Iraq, all of that within Asia and China. So that's Draconian, Syrian, and Anunnaki. And I see them more as having like a grip starting from the South Pole and then working their way up to these different places. To whereas the Zeta, the Lyran, and the Pleiadian, black and white nobility royal lines, these are all negative polarized family lines. They're more, I see them coming from the North Pole and working their way down. So they're more from like the Vatican, starting in the North Pole, UK, Ireland, Scotland, and then they move down into France and from Scandinavia into Eastern Europe, and eventually down into the Vatican and kind of Mediterranean area. But the whole Russian area and then connected into Canada is all connected through these Zeta kind of Luciferic family lines, which the South Pole family lines I see as kind of a bit more satanic oriented, if that makes sense. I know it's a lot.
And I think a good thing that I quickly want to throw in there, people, when they hear the words Osirian, Pleiadian, Lyran, they automatically assume those are all positive star races, star beings. And that is not necessarily true. There are negatively polarized beings in all different races and positively polarized. And I've seen this in a lot of people's readings, that there are like little factions that break off and became like space pirates, basically, that separated themselves. Yeah, that's
Space pirate.
Yeah, and they went against because they were interested in serving themselves.
Yeah, and so these areas are what I see, you know, when I tune into kind of what I've been tracking with this kind of current of energy and the way these different races kind of mix together. But again, it all kind of, it's more nuanced than that. But I tried to bring that into the different areas in the family lines that correspond to the different oversouls that I see are hijacked and infected. And so these families converge in the United States and Canada, that aspect of North America, mostly the United States, and they're all mixing together. So they're doing the actual breeding process, and they're doing the cloning and replicating process as well. So that's why the US is this like core, this heart of kind of everything that's going on. It's like almost like the final stand where all of these families are kind of converging into. And so that's why we see the US being so involved in human trafficking, because the areas of the inner earth that it's connected to and these timelines of these families, they all converge in the US, which has access to these different galactic kind of transportation systems to work out the human trafficking on a galactic scale.
So yeah, that is definitely a lot, but this is all necessary if you want to get the most out of the rest of the story. So yeah, that is why the human trafficking, and we are looking over here because our notes are over
it's a lot
here.
Of notes.
So what is this looking glass stuff?
So just like I said, the convergence in the United States, like it's all around the Four Corners area, which is Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. And so that area was a convergence point for Atlantis and Lemurian tribes. And it was very, it eventually became very heavily associated with reincarnated Lemurian tribes. So in the inner earth there is this whole setup, and it connects over into kind of Area 51 and Nevada area. But that Four Corners area is a convergence point. It's like it's kind of like a center point, because you connect to it from going from Canada down to Mexico, and then from California over to the East Coast. You're going through this Four Corners area. And so naturally, that's just like an energetic convergence point. So this is connected to the looking glass technology, which is in Los Alamos in New Mexico. And Los Alamos is where they created the atomic bomb. They tested the first atomic weapon, the atomic bomb. And so this area underneath the earth is connected into, it's a portal system. So it's connected to other planets, other parts of the galaxy. And this looking glass technology is what they use to basically peer into the future, to use their entire service to self matrix in order to hold down the timelines that they want to hold down. So if they peer through Looking Glass and they see a timeline working out that doesn't work for them, they're going to then try and stop that timeline from happening. In this area for the Looking Glass, this Looking Glass technology is a massive portal as well, like I said, underneath Los Alamos, where it connects into all of these different Stargate systems across the planet. So then you have this whole, or across the galaxy, I mean. And so then you have this whole area in New Mexico that's around kind of Los Alamos, but it's these Indian reservations and Native American reservations, and like a lot of places that are run down and like desolate and isolated. And this is in Arizona as well, some parts of Colorado and some parts of Utah. And so they use these areas that have these indigenous family lines still running in there to basically abduct these beings and to abduct these indigenous beings and run experiments on them, put them through the human trafficking, galactic trafficking system. And so they position themselves in that area specifically to have access to these communities that have been cut off intentionally. And it acts as basically a menu for them to pick and choose for cloning and human trafficking. Because everybody's pushed into these larger city areas. We've clumped together. And so all these other areas don't have actual protection and actual guardianship around them. So they're just using them to run all of these agendas.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they do that is through distribution systems, the transportation of mass goods. So we know about shipping containers done in like the sea, where those are used to ship humans. So then they take control of distribution through airplanes, through cargo airplanes, and then through also semi-trucks for the land. And so that's all this activity that's happening in the United States, which is acting as this menu for all of these service to self families that exist globally.
Mm-hmm. So this was a whole introduction to the cloning system, and you're probably wondering, okay, and now what does this have to do with your story and your history? And that is why it was necessary to first give you all of this, so that you are gonna fully understand who Nancy is.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't even fully, so I'm going to be listening with all of you to probably for the first time the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes.
Yeah, and on my YouTube, I've really outlined my timeline, from my individual perception, and from the time that I was put through mind control experiments when I was born to everything that happened in my most previous life that then led to me being taken and brought to this planet, put through the mind control experiments, and given to Nancy. So that's going to be a piece that kind of connects into the puzzle that you're going to have to go watch or listen to on your own time, because this is more going to be the perspective from Nancy's, the Nancy's perspective, leading into kind of the point where we ended up converging in Alaska, where I was told that I was born.
And if you're on YouTube, I will link that specific video at the end of this podcast. So that'll be the next video that you can click on then.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So you knew Nancy basically as your mother. You grew up thinking this is my mom.
Mm-hmm.
But so who is she actually?
She is a cloned aspect of a dark service to self being who I've had conflict with in many, many different lives throughout the galaxy and the universe. And so Nancy, the body that I know as Nancy, is this cloned aspect, this kind of dumbed down version of these other aspects that are basically Nancy's other incarnations. However, Nancy has been created through the cloning process. And so she was actually my handler growing up. And I was given to her as a baby in order for her to be with me throughout my life and to keep me in this state of reality being a lie.
Mm-hmm. And so she is basically a clone of this darker being, this darker avatar being, basically. And how did that happen?
So, in her lives, she originally was incarnated into service to others' family lines in like the original human time cycles. And she went through a process of going through the fall, which was giving herself to service to self, giving herself to the darkness. So she has intertwined herself with the consciousness of Lilith, and is one of the main sources of creating that consciousness of Lilith throughout these different time periods. So she's existed as a Draconian, as an Anunnaki, as a Zeta Gray, as just a human, as a fish person, as many different beings, just like we talk about our other lives. But in all of these other lives, she has chosen to embody the depth of darkness and of service to self. So her consciousness is merged with the consciousness of Lilith, is what it is.
And for some people watching, there is in the whole New Age a lot of confusion around the figure of Lilith, within, especially in the divine feminine circles, that she's actually being viewed as a positive being. I personally have never really felt drawn to it, but that's where a lot of confusion also is being, like, I feel like her consciousness is purposely being blended in the New Age with that of a positive being. And that there's like a difference.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the consciousness of Lilith wanting to lie and deceive in order to get people to choose her, to be on her side, and to work with their Lilith aspect is what it's called. But Lilith is not an aspect that you can embody or integrate, because Lilith is a separate, fragmented consciousness that is completely identified as being separate to God. So no matter how much you integrate and embody the energy that is Lilith, Lilith is always going to exist in the service to self polarity and is not going to change. And so she is an antichrist consciousness that is the feminine aspect of what the antichrist actually is.
And what would be the opposite of, because if I'm just trying to make sense of it so that people, like, if we see the aspect that then incarnated is Nancy or the clone, and she's basically the anti-mother, the fake mother. And then what would be the opposite energy of Lilith? Would be the divine mother,
Sophia,
basically.
I guess is what I would say. Yeah, Sophia. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Sophia, or in other languages there's so many names, of course.
Yeah, so many. And that's what I use the name Sophia to kind of umbrella it, but there are many different names. Okay. And so it's the inversion of the divine mother is what and who Lilith is. And so Lilith has actually had bodies in these other lives, as almost like an antichrist type figure. So when Nancy started polarizing service to self, that's when I stopped incarnating in family lines with her. But then all of these other scenarios played out where she still found us and created malevolence, created destruction.
So basically this is not like for a lot of people that are going through these scenarios where they are uncovering childhood deception, abuse, that their mother was actually their handler. For a lot of these people, this is all connected to other incarnations where similar patterns have happened, and where there's a lot of karma that is coming into play from these people not wanting to accept basically that they cannot own that person or claim that person
Mm-hmm.
is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, definitely. And I talked about this in one of my mind control memories chapters of the videos. But when I was little, very, very young, a baby, like 6 months old, I was put through or I don't think it was, I think it was multiple times, but I was put through a wedding ceremony, like a matrimony process with Nancy, which was basically with Lilith. So they were marrying me to Lilith as I was a baby. So like you're saying, it was like her, you just used a word, but I can't remember what it was. It was like claiming me or something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
It was with a C, I think, but I can't remember.
So yeah, basically you stopped choosing on like this Akashic scale to incarnate in these family lines, because obviously you are service to others. You are choosing to serve the greater good others. You are not choosing to be entangled with souls that are choosing service to self, because that does not line up with your soul path. And I, of course, am involved with you on all of these soul levels, so we are always choosing to serve others. But then basically, how did that, so what happened to her essence then that this connection here took place?
Can you reframe
so
that?
Basically that she chose to become this embodiment of evil, or malevolence, of and letting jealousy fuel her decisions on a soul level, basically.
So yeah, exactly. And so she's a being that is she is significant in the service to self hierarchy. So because of what you said, like the convergence here around the karma and all of these other things kind of happening here, she, as this full version of herself, found herself on this planet because she is involved with all of that service to self agenda. So naturally she found herself here in these different races and in these different lines, and has cloned herself into different aspects of herself throughout these different time periods. So like this, at one point she was, a draconian in Egypt, and so she cloned herself into this other person who wasn't Nancy. So now she's this other, I think she's like a draconian right now. She has cloned herself into Nancy as well.
Just so that the people understand, also the Nancy that we're talking about is the one that is doing all of the stuff behind the scenes. And then the Nancy that raised you, is she aware that she is all these things, or is she a clone that is basically a cloned version of that version that's been around, but she's not really aware, and she has been put through this maybe fake program where she believes that she has just a normal history of childhood?
I bounced back and forth, and it always comes back to me feeling like she's way more aware than I think that she is, and that she has, as this clone, been put through certain things like hypnosis with me, where they like put in these false memories at the same time with her and I together, and like they bonded us together. So she has this distortion in her field, but from what I've seen over time and time again is that she's been very aware every single time of me when I'm going through these processes with her. She's aware of kind of her scope in the whole picture, is what it feels like. Yeah.
And we may be getting a tiny bit off script, but this is just good, I think, for people too. Like, what I'm then thinking is they probably also want to make sure that they are all covered up with making sure that she stays in character. So it would make sense that they would put you through like simultaneous reprogramming programs, so that she basically believes the whole script. Because somebody that believes the lie that they're telling, when you put that person through a lie detector test, body scanning, like face reading, body language, that person is going to be fully convinced that they're speaking the truth. And no lie detector, no person that is skilled in reading body language, reading faces, is going to think that this person is lying. So that's what I'm thinking may also.
Yeah, I think I feel that with her, it's more so that she's aware of what's happening. And even if she's not aware of herself in these other incarnations or these other bodies, she's aware of the larger picture of these things that are going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then we are gonna go into, because of course Nancy is just one figure in like a grander thread of other people.
Yeah, I might read some of this just directly.
Yes, because we have a lot of notes.
Yeah, and it's different names and it's kind of bouncing around. And I'm gonna try and be as connected as best as I possibly can. And so like, it's like
I'll move this
Nancy was, as she polarized service to self in these other timelines and became jealous, became malevolent, she decided to start making her own artificial family lines. So through the processes described in the first part of this video, she has been on this mission to create her own family lines that are in competition with the things that we are experiencing. And it's not just us either. There are many players to this game, and she has had this sense of competition and jealousy towards many different people that are part of these service to others family lines. And so her family, also I just want to say, Nancy's most current forms are Draconian, Lyran, and Zeta Gray. So she's existing as kind of like all three of these as more of her full embodied self. She's not a clone in these aspects, but she exists as these different embodiments. One on this planet, inner Earth, and then her other forms are in the Orion constellation, off planet. And so I just wanted to speak that because, Nancy, I'm pretty sure you're watching and I know you're in Orion.
But now the Nancy that would potentially be watching this, the one that
Is
raised you,
is Lilith.
Is she aware of these other forms of her, and that she's a cloned version of these other forms of her?
It feels like she is. It feels like she is.
Okay.
It feels like she knows that she is a clone.
Okay. And I know I'm getting a tiny bit off script. I'm just wondering, so there are a lot of these clones, they are born or created in these facilities, and a lot of them are then placed in these family lines. And they are we're just recapping a little bit. They're getting birth certificates, they're getting fake evidence of like all this stuff, like the parents that are pregnant, that they are faking pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
Because this technology, like we said, has been around, so they have been able to do this. And that would also make sense why in other time periods in history, sometimes you would hear, like Victorian times, how it was so unfit for a girl to be pregnant and she wasn't married and she would disappear. And you wouldn't see this girl for 9 months and suddenly she had a baby, and it was all because it was like not proper for her or whatever, and she went into hiding. But a lot of this is just like fitting in with the whole cloning program.
Because it's also so difficult with the mind, like when you're shown someone's baby picture, when you're told these stories of what it was like when they were growing up, of these memories that they have, it's so disorienting. And the only way that I've been able to move through this was just to, over time, continually trust in my intuition that like what I'm being presented with was not the truth. And it's just like, I can't remember what else I was going to say, but yeah.
It's also the fact that it's not just happening to him. There's similar stories from people from that we don't know.
Yeah, this is happening on a mass scale, and that's exactly why I'm talking about it in this detail the way I am, because this is the thread that we are pulling at in terms of wanting to reveal all of the service to self structures. Everything that we've been highlighting in this and the details, it's all the core matrix structures of this service to self system. So the more we talk about it, it's like it's this feeling really of being able to connect all of these different dots together, and especially talk about Nancy's family and connect all of this. It's this feeling of almost like checkmate. Like there is nowhere for these beings to move anymore, because this whole aspect of them hiding in plain sight is now coming into our awareness. So it's like a checkmate.
So her family that you were saying earlier, she created this entire competitive family, basically, is what you said. And then brought you into this family to try to win, like make you a part of this family line then, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like, it's like, you know, having aunts and cousins and uncles, but it was all through Nancy's side. And so the things, it's exactly like what you said. It's them wanting to take my essence and to make me a part of this family, this shadow family, and it's all being orchestrated by those dark avatar versions of Nancy, the ones that aren't the clone but have created themselves as the clone of Nancy and are orchestrating this whole picture. So this is where there's a lot of names, so I'm probably just going to read directly from this. So Nancy's sister, Cynthia. Cynthia is a clone that is the same consciousness that is Nancy, but also she's combined with the consciousness of my true birth mother. So this is where that whole conflict comes into play, which I've described in other videos of me being taken with my birth mother. Nancy was a part of all of that happening as well on this other planet in this parallel timeline. And so this aunt that I had named Cynthia, she's combined with Nancy and the consciousness of my true birth mother. Her body is sourced from the cloning centers of Italy, specifically underneath Lake Como, is where I've been seeing these centers. So Nancy's other sister named Jake is a clone of a service to others being. This is what she described as a positive being having genetic material taken from them and then being used to create clones in another time. So she has always, she's has the essence and the remaining echo of a service to others being. And so she's actually the one that I feel isn't willingly and intentionally choosing darkness like these other aspects of the family. So Barkley is a clone of Malcolm. So Malcolm is a family name that has been passed down through these elite family lines. And Malcolm so Barkley was Nancy's brother. And so Malcolm is Nancy's father. And I put these things in quotes because it's this whole narrative that I was presented in terms of he is it's so hard to describe this because there's so many layers. So there is it makes me confused trying to say
let's just quickly do a recap. There is Nancy. There is Nancy's sister Cynthia. Then this other sister Jake, a clone of a service to others being. Then there is a brother named Barkley, and he is a clone of somebody named Malcolm, who is the father figure that was presented as the father figure.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Okay.
And then there's Jan, who was Nancy's mother, presented as the mother figure. And Jan is also a clone of a service to others being. She held the consciousness of a service to others, and she was very heavily programmed and manipulated to be this villain, like this villain throughout this whole process. Everything that was wrong with their family is kind of focused and blamed on Jan. And so I'm just going to read this direct and then try and explain it, because I know how confusing it is when I'm trying to talk about it, and I think I wrote it to help with that confusion. So Malcolm is Nancy's father, her father figure. The consciousness of Malcolm is actually a dark avatar, like the original Nancy, like Lilith. So the Malcolm that I was presented with as the father figure is actually a clone of the original Malcolm, who is the dark avatar. Just like Nancy is a clone of her dark avatar, Malcolm was a clone of his dark avatar. And his dark avatar is working with the covert, oh my God, this gets so confusing. So the true Malcolm has been hiding in secrecy. Well, a false Malcolm was presented as my grandfather, as the father figure. The narrative was that Malcolm died before I was born. So I never got to meet my grandfather. But that grandfather that I was told died was not the original version of the true grandfather. I think that's...
Yes. So basically, the way that I understand it is these beings, they all have the same names. We say Nancy, and when we say Nancy, we mean the person that raised him, but also these other versions of her. And when we say Malcolm, we mean the grandfather, but we also mean like this other original version, and both of them are basically these dark avatar beings and these clones are like extensions of themselves that are then fulfilling these roles of like the family traditional roles, but they are purely a copy paste of the original file, so to speak.
There we go.
Okay,
that's perfect.
Yes.
And this is important because the original Malcolm and the original Nancy are actually service to self lovers together through the Draconian and the Zeta royalty lines. So Malcolm is this royal name that's been passed down through these combined lines. And the true original Malcolm is a covert agent for the black nobility and Russian elite lines. So that Malcolm is still alive and is working in this covert intelligence space. Well, the Malcolm that I was presented with died before I was ever born. That makes sense, right?
Yes.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
As much as it could. And so, and you know, these different cloning centers that I'm mentioning, like Cynthia being from the Italy cloning center.
The sister.
Yeah, the sister. Jake being from the Italy cloning center. Barkley being from the Italy cloning center. Nancy being from the Italy cloning center. And Malcolm being from the Italy clone center. But Jan, the mother, is from the Antarctica cloning center. So if you imagine the original Malcolm and original Nancy like dark avatar partners, twin flames essentially, they are the ones that are orchestrating all of this throughout these different locations around the earth. So they're then able to take their consciousness to these different cloning locations and turn them in to these different false family versions of themselves. And so Jan, her original grandparents are from the Reich Party. So they were brought from Germany to the US after World War I, and they were a part of the cloning centers on the East Coast and the cloning centers under the Great Lakes and Michigan area. These Nancy's grandparents, the parents of Jan, are actually draconian shapeshifters, and they are from Antarctica, and they're not from Germany. But this is where we see a whole connection between this draconian family line and the Reich Party, and that I'll get into in other videos. Does there need to be a recap?
I think that is pretty clear, and if
Okay.
something is not clear, then just put a comment.
Okay. I think there's these things I try to be specific on because I know it's going to come back at a later point, but I'm going to just try and let that happen rather than hammer in the thing that I think needs to be specific.
Yes.
Okay, so Nancy and Barkley, because Barkley is AKA Malcolm, it's the consciousness of Malcolm, they grew up holding a unique type of relationship since their souls are actually lovers in other lives, because Barkley is actually a clone of Malcolm. When I say unique, I mean unique, in different sexual ways. And there is another clone of Nancy, of the original Nancy. And this clone's name is Catherine. Catherine is actually a clone reptilian shapeshifter. So she's not a human clone. She's a clone of a shape-shifting reptilian. And Catherine is just another name for Nancy. So Catherine and Barkley were actually married at one point, and they had a child. And this is basically a karmic repeat from Nancy and Malcolm's other lives. When my father, Peter, died when I was 10, Catherine is actually the one who gave the eulogy at Peter's funeral. So seeing this now, it was the consciousness of Nancy, aka Lilith, using the speech as a magic ritual to siphon energy from Peter and his family and myself, and to keep herself in a position of superiority and a feeling of dominating the experience of Peter's death, who she despises just as much as she despises me. I think I'm just going to keep... Do you have something to add? These seem to be making more sense.
I think if people look at it as a file that you can just copy and paste in another folder. And that's how you create different chapters, aka families. So you can take an original book and you start just mixing and matching different files and putting them in all these folders, and you create a whole new book with the information that you basically stole from the original book that was in a whole different order to each other. So where maybe two chapters have nothing to do with each other or not interacting because it wouldn't make sense, these people are then just bringing them together in a way that suits their needs, but that doesn't necessarily serve the reader, the people, humanity, so to speak.
Yeah, and this is where we get into these secret societies and these families that hold down secret societies and the shadow families, because this is a shadow family. This family is aware of the things that they're connected into, and I'm going to explain that more in a second. But this is where you get replications and cloning because these people want to just pass down the same consciousness throughout generations because they're so greedy and they're so self-absorbed that they just want themselves to run generation after generation of these societies and of these secret organizations. And so they'll just continue to pass down their consciousness. And so these families, this is a perfect example of a shadow family that has deliberately given itself to the dark, been created from the dark, knows that it's given itself to this level of energy and hides it and lives in a state of secrecy. So Barkley is a dark warlock. He is AKA Malcolm. He is Malcolm.
So the brother.
The brother, Barkley, yeah. Him and Nancy are well trained in dark magic together and have been participating in it together throughout their life, this current life, as these replications of themselves. Barkley has attempted to program his other children in his footsteps, with his daughter actually doing so and practicing magic and dark witchcraft in secrecy. So I used to visit this family all the time, and it's a complete acting ploy that they put on throughout this secrecy and through being dedicated to this shadow space. And the family friends that I grew up visiting that were close to Nancy, like her best friends, they also practice dark magic and dark witchcraft. So you can see how this is something that's been continually chosen throughout this process of evolution. And at this point, they are still aware of it and they are still practicing it. And this is what's been shielded from me throughout my life growing up, and what they were trying to eventually get me to be programmed and be a part of.
Yes, so basically that connects to what I said in the beginning, where there's an entire layer of society that is these families, and that is simply how they work, because they lack a certain sense of empathy or true connection to love, to source. So they are very externally focused on the image. This is just what I am intuitively feeling about all these families. And because you see nothing but all these families around you, and you're basically then put through this program. So all these children, like your cousins, family, friends, and their kids, they're all being put through all the same program. And then they all grow up, and it's almost just you click into the role, and then you become the parent, and you do the same with your children.
Yeah.
And I've had clients come to me that were involved with somebody. They married that person, had children, and then they find out that their husband is in some kind of satanic cult, and the children get taken from her because she was not okay with it. But that was like, yeah, you don't have a choice. This is how things happen, basically. So with him now speaking about this, he's super breaking protocol, basically, from their whole program.
Yeah, and that's been the process this whole time, and why I knew I had to confront her fully, have the face-to-face conversation, and completely cut her out of my life, because it is all of these chains and all of these cords that they put on me and intentionally tried to create to siphon my energy or use me in some way. And so each time I talk about it, it just feels so good. Like I already feel so good right now. We're not even done with it. All right.
So basically these families are operating and doing all kinds of stuff like these with these children that are then born into these families and being trafficked and all kinds of stuff. And they have to have like a fake front, like for all of this to be able to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's, for example, schools and like, I don't know, all kinds of organizations that look like they are normal stores, sports organizations.
Yeah, anything. It's like a hardware store, like an auto shop.
Those are all part basically of this whole system. And how are they involved? Like, what did that look like for your family, or like the family? Not you mean?
Yeah.
Where you grew up in.
So when I was in like middle school to high school, Nancy got a job with Barkley, and Barkley he became the CEO of this produce company. And so the story and the narrative was that they were part of this produce business for a lot of their lives. And I think he might have even been a CEO at other places that wasn't just produce. But the story was that they all had this produce store when they were younger. It was this kind of family run produce store. And Barkley had this store with his friend named Jim. And so Barkley and Jim were working together at Albert's Organics, which is when Nancy got the job there. And then eventually Barkley left Albert's Organics and went to another company named Fresh Pack. And Barkley's friend Jim followed him to that same company. And Nancy then followed him there as well. And so this produce company was a large produce distribution company. So they worked with global produce, distributing it to many different grocery stores and areas. And so what I'm seeing is that these royal family lines orchestrated Nancy and Barkley's lives to have them in this produce world where there are distribution and transportation systems that allow secret cargo. Just like how I mentioned earlier, the Draconian and the Zeta families use industries to transport their human cargo, their trafficked humans. So the produce world stretches across many, many countries globally, many locations that have feasting eyes from the predators, where they've isolated impoverished areas to have very little protection, very little guardianship and understanding to how vulnerable their environments and circumstances are. So we're now just discovering the galactic human trafficking scheme. And that is what this whole thing connects into. And that's why we had to paint this picture to show you how this system is existing with this whole galactic trafficking scheme and this galactic trafficking system.
Okay, just real quick so that people understand. You're saying so they all basically, they have this whole cover up story of this is how we are involved with this produce industry, this is how it started. But then okay, so what do you mean for people watching? The royal family lines orchestrated it for them to have access to that network through that produce. Like, who are the royal family lines that you speak of?
The royal family lines are the original Nancy and the original Malcolm that are not the cloned versions of themselves.
Okay.
So they're the ones who are holding these royal lines, and so they're creating a network system, like you're saying, through those cloned family lines. And so in order to enhance their purpose in their system here, they set up that system through Nancy and through Barkley.
Okay, but they're like the negatively polarized royal.
Yes.
Is what you would call. Okay.
Yes, negative royalty.
Yes.
Definitely.
Okay.
And so this is a whole system and a whole scheme that's connected to all of these different planets, all of these different star systems. And that's why this feels like checkmate, because this is this entire picture of things that are going on that they do not want to be spoken about in one coherent type of understanding. And so we are now aware of this whole picture, of this whole system that's happening on this planet, and where these locations are, what they're connected into. And that is creating this ripple effect throughout the entire galaxy, where this same exact thing is also happening. Mm-hmm. And this is with the produce, with just bringing back to the locations of the Four Corners, underground in Los Alamos and underground in the Denver International Airport in Colorado. Those are two major Stargate transportation systems for galactic trafficking. And so in that area, also around Los Alamos in New Mexico, you'll see like uranium mines, and I think it's uranium, for this mass weapons industry. So that's another aspect of utilizing these locations in order to harvest this energy from these ripe kind of convergence areas. So that whole Four Corners area is this transport to Mars, to Sirius, to many different places that hold these human trafficking systems.
It is a lot, but it's necessary that we take this slowly so that you understand that this is not just happening on Earth. This is like a whole network that spans between planets, star systems, times, and even just all the way throughout the entire multiverse. Yeah. Basically.
Yeah, and the reason why it's so detailed, because it now starts to come together a little bit more here as well, is like all of the family lines that I described are in that northern pole area that come down through the UK, Ireland, Scotland, France. They extend over through Scandinavia and Eastern Europe and into Russia. They're all connected over into Canada and into the US as well. And those South Pole families then come up from Central America, and they connect into the United States. Come up from South America, from Antarctica, and they connect into the United States. So here is where you have my narrative come into place and kind of bring these things, kind of connect them together. So enter me. I am brought through the Looking Glass portal in Los Alamos in 1987. I've talked about this in some other videos. I was born on a parallel planet. It was in the body of Mars. It was a parallel timeline. And I was kidnapped and brought through a Stargate system to this planet, this current reality. I was brought through the Looking Glass portal in Los Alamos, and this was in 1987. And I was brought here through the Galactic Human Trafficking Networks. It's the same Stargate system that we were just talking about. So I was quickly transported to the underground bases and service to self hideouts in Alaska, because this is joint territory between the service to self factions and the different family lines that are converging in the United States, Canada, Russia, etc. And so I was transported to Alaska, and I am now underground in these service to self facilities. So here comes the true Malcolm, the dark avatar of Malcolm, who was already working with these families, specializing with mind control programming towards children specifically. And oh wait, what is that?
Maybe it's a good time to take a quick break.
All right. Okay. We took a slight break to untangle some knots. So I left off that I was brought to Alaska in these underground territories for service to self families and service to self extraterrestrial beings. So this is where the true Malcolm, the dark avatar of Malcolm, actually came into my life at that point. as I was this kidnapped baby. And him and the true Nancy actually participated in experiments with myself and my true birth mother, that because we were both taken together. So the true dark avatars of Nancy and Malcolm were participating in trauma bond mind control experiments with myself and my birth mother. Well, the clone of Nancy was basically getting prepared for me to be given to her. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So like the original file, like I said at the beginning, helped with the experiments and the kidnapping, basically.
Yeah.
While her copied file, the clone, is being prepared for the task of then keeping the programming going and raising you, being the handler.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And so this is where the narratives for Nancy around her pregnancy and her being pregnant began, because and this is also where the relationship between her and my father Peter began. And so this is where they started slowly positioning Nancy to come to Alaska. She first went to Illinois, which is near the Michigan and Great Lakes cloning centers that I mentioned before. So this is where she was impregnated with the cloning process, and a false artificial body began growing inside of her. So we've talked about this in other episodes as well around the clones. There is a way for these cloned bodies to go through a process of what looks like pregnancy. It is essentially a artificial hybrid clone having a clone baby. And still don't know the full details on how that's possible, but we'll try to include the link to that episode in the description of this as well. So Nancy was impregnated with this cloning process, and this false artificial body began growing inside of her. Well, I was at the final points of mind control and torture programs with my birth mother, where my birth mother was forced by service to self beings to make me shapeshift, and I was forced to watch her get hurt. So they created all of these trauma bonds between us. They injected me with nanotechnology, hormone inhibitors, and holographic inserts, and other things that I don't even know how to fully explain yet. And they had created their false Rayan. So the psychological operation who would now be born, they created me, who was this false Rayan, who would now be the psychological operation that would be born and inserted into normal day reality.
Into the program.
Yeah. So you can see kind of this convergence happening where Nancy goes through this impregnating process. I'm in Alaska, and there's all this motion kind of coming up and converging to Alaska. So Peter, my father, was aware of this the entire time. He knew about every single thing that was going on that I just mentioned. And he played this part in perfect secrecy. He was not a negative being, but he was playing this kind of double agent.
Okay, but so that people know, when you say Peter, you are talking about the person that was in the program made to be the father figure with Nancy as the mother figure. And their relationship was established the moment that you were basically that they had you, so to speak. And then they started preparing for that fake family scenario by putting them together in a relationship.
Yes.
But he is not the birth father. He is the person that raised you, that you knew as your father.
Yes, and he's a copy of my true biological father. So I call him my father, and this is where part 2 is going to come in, and it's going to be the story of Peter. And so, yes, he was my father figure growing up, and he was the person who they were trying to pair with Nancy as this artificial kind of family line. And Peter didn't want anything to do with Nancy, but I got involved through this whole, it's going to take a whole other part to explain this. But Peter was playing a double agent, and he was positioned to head to Alaska as well at the same time. And so he went to Alaska before Nancy, and Nancy came to Alaska. And when she got to Alaska, that's where she went through this birthing process. And so on December 9th, 1991, while Nancy was delivering an artificial baby, Peter was underground picking me up from this service to self beings who thought Peter was on their side. And once the artificial baby, the cloned baby, was delivered in the hospital by Nancy, I was quickly brought in, swapped out, and given to Nancy as hers.
For people that are now like, what is happening? So basically, this whole process was created so that to everyone around him, it would seem like, how can this be, like, this is real, because she was pregnant, such as other family members, close friends that may not be aware of the whole, how far this goes, this program, that yes, they have evidence, yeah, but she was pregnant and all this. Because, so I'm just now making sense of it so that you can make sense of it, because then that would seem good for like everyone involved, because she actually creates more clones that then are placed in this whole program, and at the same time she has a story, and it all fits together in their fake book that they're making with all their copied files in this other folder with everything like all scrambled up, where you are the baby, but you were not the baby.
I was not the baby.
So then that the clone baby
was given somewhere else.
Yes.
That's a whole other story for a whole other time.
Okay.
That clone baby that she had was taken away and given to somewhere else throughout this system and is existing currently somewhere else.
Okay.
So yes, thank you for clarifying that. And after I was given to Nancy at the hospital, we then went to our apartment that we lived together. And I kid you not, the name of the street that we lived on was called Resurrection Drive. And they did this, the service to self puppeteers set that up for a very specific reason, because their goal was to resurrect this dark overlord structure into my body. That's why they were bringing me into their false family, because they wanted to turn me into this dark weapon for them and resurrect this almost like a Malcolm consciousness, this dark avatar consciousness that's passed down. They wanted to resurrect that in my body. In the occult practices, it's known as the resurrection of Osiris. So it's all connected to the same kind of artificial hive mind overlord that they're trying to bring through in my body. So that's why they put me through everything that I've described that I experienced as a baby. So cue the mind control experiments, the abuse, the rape, the lies. For a year and a half, when I was first given to Nancy, I would be taken through a secret underground entranceway through a daycare that Nancy worked at. This underground entranceway held laboratories for scientific research and psychic experimentation. It had bedroom units in it. It had fake living rooms, fake kitchens, fake bedrooms, all designed for psychology experiments and all connected to a portal system with access to Russia and their covert underground facilities. So this then ties the knot in with the original Nancy, meaning the Lilith avatar, and the original Malcolm, who both participated in these mind control torture experiments with me before I was given to the clone of Nancy, they would then come back and participate in these mind control experiments together, claiming me as their intergalactic property that they can use for their purposes. So that, I am hoping, ties things with my experience back together of the entire structure that was just kind of laid out. And these are things that are connecting for the first time in my understanding that I haven't even fully had in a coherent picture yet, just because I was able to speak all of that out. So,
okay, so you say the original Nancy and the original Malcolm, they would participate in these experiments together with also clone handler Nancy.
yes.
So if we say like basically original Nancy and clone Nancy, like what do we picture? We know, of course, like what do we picture? What are these beings?
Well, I picture the aspect of Nancy being like a draconian shapeshifter.
Okay.
She can shapeshift between multiple genetic races that are like kind of like Lyran Zeta shapeshifter and draconian shapeshifter. And I see her being a part of this. She's in her human body form as she's in these experiments with the clone aspect of Nancy participating with her. And the same thing with Malcolm. Malcolm is a shapeshifter as well. He's originally like an extraterrestrial Zeta type shapeshifter. And so he then would participate in his human form.
Okay, that was my question.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's the end of what I had written down.
okay, and that is basically the whole beginning of your life.
Yeah.
But then, because I'm sure then and you have gone into that in your videos, in the mind control videos, like your childhood and all the other stuff up until the point where you started having your memories back. Is that something for another episode, or is that something that you feel you've covered enough in the mind control videos?
Yeah, I'll talk about it more in other episodes. I think that's good enough for now in the other mind control videos, because it all spaces things out pretty well, and it leads into the most recent ones I've been doing, which are like connecting all of the kind of the dots at one time. So it goes from that point we just ended, where I'm entering the mind control experiments that first year and a half. That's where the mind control memory chapters start. So from there, you can then get details around the things that were done in these experiments and how that unfolded up until I then had the suppressed memories come up, and how I've understood things since I've had the memories come up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that part 2 that I'm gonna do is around like the origin of Peter and who Peter truly is, because that will paint this other line. That's the other half of this picture, which is why Peter and Nancy were trying to be brought together, why it was this whole like, there's still many, many more pieces to connect, but I think it's going to come through the aspect of Peter.
And so this is your story. Do you feel that this is happening to more people? Like we said, we know about some people that have some memories, but then there are also people that know that they've been in these family lines, but that are completely unaware of any galactic stuff going on, that are not even like spiritually, like on any spiritual journey. They are just aware of these family lines exist. This type of abuse exists, and it is all connected to these bloodlines, and they are in politics, they are in government, they are in celebrity culture, they are running all this stuff, but they are not necessarily aware of the galactic scale that this is happening on, the connections to Atlantis, to beyond Atlantis, to other star systems, that this is something that's been going on for like 10,000s of years.
Oh yeah, very, very long.
But so
There's
there
a
are
lot
people.
This is happening to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like the exact same thing that I've been put through is happening to people. And there are people then at different layers that have experienced different things that are aware of it or they're not aware of it. There are some reptilian beings that can shapeshift and they don't even know that they're reptilian because they've never been told throughout their lives that they're reptilian. So they think they're human. So, and it's not like they're all polarized negatively. They're just living normal human lives, a lot of them. So you have that aspect happening. And so it's all of these different layers of like memory shielding, putting in the narratives that this consciousness wants to like keep this timeline in place. And so like even when I first talked about being brought here from another planet and from a parallel timeline, and I didn't elaborate on that in this part, but that's going to be a really big part of the Peter episode. But like I felt alone in that until I talked about it. And then I started thinking, I was like, wait, there's probably tons of people that has happened to.
And so what I'm understanding, and this is also based on just what I've seen in the Akashic records, and because stuff repeats itself throughout time in different places in the galaxy, that in each ascension cycle that has taken place in other time cycles, on Earth, off Earth, other versions of Earth, other star systems, other universes even, they are doing this to maintain, they want to have control over a situation that is beyond them. So they artificially try to keep artificial control over a situation that is beyond them. And that is how I'm seeing this, because there are so many high frequency souls incarnating, because the earth is requesting the presence of these souls. So they can try to claim these souls, put them artificially in different families, bloodlines. These souls are here with their soul memories. And if they have specific catalyst events that they are supposed to activate, it's going to activate. No matter how much you try to traumatize them, they're going to remember who they are. So this plan is like a cornered animal that is frantic. If you try to corner a wild animal, it's going to lash out. And so that's what they're doing with doing all these things. But you can't change the situation. The situation is still that they are cornered.
Checkmate. Yeah. That's exactly why.
So yeah.
Checkmate. They are in a corner. The only difference is that these animals, and I don't say that in putting them below
it's
or
just
anything,
a metaphor,
that they can use the illusion of the mind and of the psyche. So whereas, you know, like a bear, a cat, something, it's just like raw primal power. This is where this animal turns on the extra illusion, the extra magic of tricking itself out, trying to trick and get itself out of this corner.
And what better way to keep people listening to you by creating the illusion that you are bigger and stronger than them, and to have them believe that generation after generation. But the planet has an agenda of its own, and it is requesting all these souls, and they're all remembering, oh wait, I am way stronger than any program that I've been put through. So yeah.
Amen.
That's
I think. Thanks to whoever listened to all of that.
And definitely go check out the other podcast episodes. This was kind of a different, well, not really. We talk about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
We talk about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Now we have a new structure where we can kind of have like you interview me and I'll interview you. So we'll be able to go into some deeper things.
So put your questions in the comments. If they may be questions about today, questions about just in general, what the work that we do, whatever it is, reach out to us. There's also going to be an email address in the description where you can send in your stories anonymously if you don't want to put it in the comments. Maybe you have memories. Maybe you have memories of going through similar things or anything, just email us.
Indeed. I'll say what I always say when I talk about these things. The darkness only has a hold over you if it convinces you it does.
Okay, we will be back.
Bye-bye.